In 2014, I sold my house in Southern California, left my career of 17 years, and pretty much gave away most of everything I owned, except books. And I began a 1 year long journey across America, primarily on foot. But long before that, obviously I had the idea. And people will tell you, a lot of people say I'm spontaneous. But my friend Erin Rose would tell you that I'm not, and that planning that trip took 6 years. And she's right. I daydreamed about, I planned, I figured, I looked at routes, I had a map with crazy person pins. But before that, there was the bud of the idea. And again, I'll tell all the stories about why as I go through this process, because there were many times when I thought about why, and there's very many different reasons for why I began that cross-country trek. In preparation for taking myself down this memory lane, obviously I was going through pictures and I was going through some papers and journals that I kept. And in the midst of that, I came across this. It's actually written on the back of my planning pages for when I did the Trans-Catalina Trail in 2012, spring break. It's 3 days across the island of Catalina, off the coast of California, for those of you who don't know. I ended up getting really sick on day 2. I had like a bad flu, and so it was a pretty miserable hike, but there were bison everywhere, and it was beautiful. It was just hot, and I was ill, so I don't have the fondest memories of it. But at the end of the 3rd day, I was on the beach where the trail officially ends. I believe it's called Parsons Landing. And I was sitting there with my tent right on this sort of black sand beach or dark gray sand beach on Catalina Island, not another soul on the beach, and I camped there overnight by myself. And in the process of sitting there, resting my legs, resting myself because I was sick, I started thinking about the things that I had done in my life so far, the things that I had accomplished. Everyone talks about the bucket list. Long before bucket list, I had what I called a life's to-do list, and I'd written one down in a journal. And for many, many years, on both my birthday and New Year's, I would make a point of sort of checking that list and asking myself, because my birthday's in the summer, New Year's and my birthday are about 6 months apart. So I would take advantage of those times as a chance to think about, am I moving closer to my goals? What have I done in the last 6 months to try to accomplish whatever the life is I envision for myself? But on this particular occasion, sitting on that beach on Catalina Island, I decided to think back on how much I had experienced, the things I have done in my life. And I started to just make a list of what are those bucket list items that I had already ticked off of my list. In the process of doing that, it became something else. And it was interesting last night in reflecting on, since 2014, how much has happened in my life, how much I've done and seen good and bad, that it was interesting to read this from 2012. 2 years before, I began what I've seen as a period of incredible experience in my life. So I just wanted to read it as I wrote it, sitting on a beach. You can see it's not been edited. It's pretty junky and very old. But 12 years ago, sitting on that beach on Catalina Island, I wrote down what I called life's to-done list. I have watched the sunrise from Mounts Whitney and Sinai, watched the sunset over the Red Sea, and seen the lights of Saudi Arabia swallowed by evening mist. I've seen my child hear Yo-Yo Ma live, and I've seen my child put in handcuffs and taken away. I've dived deep wrecks in the Red Sea, watched a volcano erupt from a swim-up bar, rappelled down waterfalls in Costa Rica, whitewater rafted in the Andes and the Trinity River, snowshoed into the High Sierra by a light of the full moon, jumped out of a plane at over 12,000 feet more than once, been days without hearing another human voice, and weeks without speaking to another person. I've listened to classical music with the Bedouin and to John Mayer with Sudanese bosuns and Aussie lesbians. I've seen a man die whose last name I didn't know. I've seen my best friend live to hold her babies and not take it for granted. New Year's Eve fireworks from a sailboat in the middle of the ocean. I've swam naked in the oceans and lakes, pushed myself further than I should have, and sold myself short. I've sailed a boat, climbed a mountain, flew a plane, sort of. I've skimmed a rock, been a vegetarian, I've skinned an animal. I've loved a man and hated a child. Sang karaoke, got too drunk, stayed too sober. Kissed a woman, played with sharks and sea lions, scared off bears and buffalo, climbed rocks, hiked and crawled through caves, rode the surf, watched wild horses run. I've eaten fresh-caught lobster, taught children English, shook hands with village elders, joined in a festival or 2 or 3. I've studied with masters and sat alone for hours and days, on beaches, on mountains, by rivers, and by lakesides. I've hiked in the Mojave, the Sierra, the Rockies, and beaches and islands. I've ridden horses through searing heat and pounding rain. I've been lost in a foreign city. I've been to the Getty and the Cairo museums, shopped in Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, Egypt's Khan Khalili, and the open-air markets of Peru and Prague, as well as Hernandez Bodega down the street from my childhood home. I've sat by the hospital beds of my mother, my husband, my best friend, and my child. I've given grades to students who are already dead or dying. That was as far as I got that night. I don't know now, 12 years later, how I would have finished it then. But what's sort of appropriate about the fact that it didn't end is that that was just 2 years before a lot more things began. So I'm putting together pictures and gonna go from there. It's amazing to me when I read that list and reread it, how many of my childhood dreams I've accomplished and how many of my childhood fears came true. But there's so much more. And I'm in the midst of figuring out once again what's next with Nora.